And of course, the bogus names that were raised by Congressman Acop, such as Mary Grace Piattos. So these are things that I hope that the ICFA would be more stringent with. But there's one more. There. So, Attorney Camora, to the Chair, most respectfully, ito po yung certification na sinasabi po natin. This is what is submitted together with the liquidation report. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
And this is precisely provided under the joint circular.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
This is the exact language po, no? Is this an annex to the joint circular, or is there a format that is provided?
Yes, Mr. Chair. It's Annex B of the joint circular.
So as Annex B, even if the correct signatories are there, for example, it's signed by the SDO and signed by the head of agency and properly notarized, if it has been altered in any way that any of the provisions under the certification are different, di nyo po tatanggapin. It has to be worded precisely as Annex B provides. Tama po ba?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
And it would require all of these signatures,
Yes,
such as
Mr.
the head of
Chair.
agency. So we take note po that that means that there are very specific things that are required to be certified as to be submitted with the liquidation report. And some of the things that stand out, it says here po, and I quote, incurred by the undersigned. So ibig sabihin po rito, it is the SDO that personally handles and disburses the money.
Yes, Mr.
That is
Chair.
basically the crux of the certification. And it just comes with other caveats.
Yes,
Like,
Mr.
for example, first, what is spent is in connection with the agency's intelligence and or confidential operations and activities. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
And it also says that, two, it cannot be used for payment of salaries, wages, overtime, additional compensation, allowance, or other fringe benefits of officials and employees.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
And third, that the expenditures are necessary and utilized for legal purposes.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
So this means that the SDO should personally know the disbursements and the expenses incurred, and that he should have personal knowledge of all of this. That is basically what the certification is saying.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
And this hand in hand with the liquidation reports would affirm again the responsibility of the SDO to disburse the confidential fund in accordance with the provisions of the circular.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Since the SEO handles the fund personally, it necessarily follows that he gives the money. Is that correct? And I believe you answered this with Congresswoman Garin.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
You mentioned actually that there could be possibly multiple SDOs.
They could designate many SDOs.
From all of our agencies po and departments and GOCCs that would have CIF or IF, how many po would have only one SDO?
Actually, Mr. Chair, most have only one SDO. It is the agencies that have multiple SDOs that are fewer.
Okay, so mostly have one SDO.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
And in that case, that SDO is the one in charge pa rin paying, and it cannot be delegated further.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So, for example, if we have an informer, which is basically what the CIF is for, no? If you have an informer who needs to be paid, it is the SDO who personally pays this to them.
That is the presumption.
That is the
based
presumption.
on the certification, Mr. Chair.
And based on the requirements of the circular, it cannot be delegated. So the presumption should be reality. No?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
And that is the understanding of the COA.
Yes,
That
Mr.
it is them
Chair.
who personally handles it. And it is them who personally receives the acknowledgement receipt.
Yes,
Exactly.
Mr. Chair.
So the SDO cannot give it to another employee, for example, out of the 125 million, a specific, for example, compartmentalized daw, clustering. So ikaw sa rewards of medicine, ito, 20 million. And then siya na po yung in charge sa, and then whatever ARs that delegated person would receive would pass it on to the SDO. That is not allowed under the circular.
Even if he or she does that, he or she is the one ultimately accountable for those funds based on his or her certification. So, it's under his responsibility pa rin po.
Yes. So basically, command responsibility siya pa rin. But if that
Yes,
were the case,
Mr.
that is not in line with the circular because it should be personally disbursed by
Yes,
the SDO.
Mr. Chair.
Correct. So we can't be too sure that the SDO, if it were the case that it were delegated, the SDO would not be able to certify it in such a manner. Because
Yes,
supposedly
Mr. Chair.
it's saying there that he's the one who actually disbursed the money.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay. And this is the same for payments of rewards. This is not just for the handling of funds in general. Even for
Yes,
payments of
Mr.
rewards and information, it goes the same way.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
The SDO gives payment directly to the recipient, and the recipient is supposed to give the AR or any DEPs that are in relation to that. Ms. Camora, Attorney Camora, so these acknowledgement receipts were submitted by the OVP and the DepEd to COA. This is the proof, this is the documentary evidence of payment that is required by the circular. And now we have that understanding that you've confirmed now that the SDO personally handles the same. So they handle the funds and they handle personally the uh, the DEPs.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
So if there's any doubt to the confidential funds, if there is any doubt at all to the DEPs, any doubts to the ARs, which have been hammered down in the last hearing and now in this hearing, this all points down to the SDO. This is their personal responsibility under the joint circular.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
So, for example, one of the things that we pointed out last time in relation to the dates, if there is any problem with the date of the AR, it should have passed to the SDO.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Because unlike, for example, in our usual po natin, Attorney Camora, let's say, in a usual transaction, pumunta ka sa mall, bumili ka ng pagkain, magbibigay ng resibo, you wouldn't pay a second thought on that OR because usually you don't have to liquidate it anywhere. It's just a piece of paper. But as an SDO in which you have a personal responsibility, nakataya pera mo pa rin kasi nakaband ka po to the treasury.
Yes, Mr.
So
Chair.
you would have to check and make sure that all of the ARs are accurate,
Yes, Mr. Chair.
including the date.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Since one of the responsibilities under the joint circular is to disburse the CF and IF in accordance with the provisions of the circular.
Yes. So in the circular, it requires an acknowledgement receipt, and an acknowledgement receipt would require the date. So the date having been filled in for the AR and received by the SDO has the responsibility to make sure that it is correct.
Yes, Mr. Chair, although the requirement is documentary evidence.
Documentary
of
evidence.
payment.
So I'm sorry, but yes, the AR as the DEP
Yes,
would be
Mr.
required to have gone under scrutiny of the SDO. So if we had 158 ARs which have a supposed typographical error, shouldn't the SDO have caught on since they personally gave the money and received the receipt? He would check the receipt. Kung tama yung pangalan, may signature, tama yung purpose, and the date. So the 158 times na mali yung date, supposedly 158 times na dumaan po ito sa SDO.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So with that, we'd like to ask the COA. I know we've asked this before already, but we're looking into the responsibility of the COA. You've already mentioned many times that the ICFA would only be concerned with the submission of the DEPs and that you wouldn't look no further because generally parang ministerial na lang to a point. But should it have raised some red flags po? Especially now in hindsight, yung 158 with typographical errors ng dates.
Because of our hearings here, we're kind of looking into this, that we should be a little stricter on our audit from now on. So
We understand po, no, you mentioned before that one of the limitations of your office is manpower. And I think
Yes,
one
Mr.
thing that the
Chair.
committee will be working on in aid of legislation is to strengthen po the COA, that you would have the proper manpower support to make sure that this does not happen again. I think
yes.
that's one thing personally this representation would like to push forward for the consideration of the committee. But with that said, so I hope now the ICFA would take into special consideration not only the impossibility of typographical errors, the frequency of it occurring, the time span in which it happens. And of course, now, as mentioned by Congressman Adjong, we've seen earlier that there are problems even to the multiple names with different signatures. This should have raised a red flag. And of course, the bogus names that were raised by Congressman Acop, such as Mary Grace Piattos. So these are things that I hope that the ICFA would be more stringent with. But there's one more matter, aside from that, which we have brought up from the previous hearing, that I hope that you could consider. Upon studying po yung DEPs natin, and we already know that there's a question about the time span in which that it was dispersed. Alam natin, questionable yung 11 days, na 5 days pa nga po ay holiday, dispersed po ito lahat. But one more thing we have to consider, now that you have affirmed to us, now that we understand it better, na yung SDO is personally in charge of dispersing the funds, we collated po yung ating mga DEPs. And we've seen po, for example, this is, I think, the DepEd. So this would be by Mr. Fajardo. For the, I believe this is the first quarter of 2023, submitted on the 31st of March, there were disbursements every day po, no? Since the release of the cash.